I'm guessing all of you guys have obviously watched the official launch cinematic, and while cool looking as always, there really wasn't all that much crazy stuff going on outright. It was mostly that these are just some cool things we'll be able to do in Dragonflight. However, Blizzard did, unbeknownst to many, actually throw a few hints our way that have gone sort of under the radar. There is that insanely powerful forest creating bread of Alexstrasza, which is just out of this world, and got us asking like, what are you doing, Alexstrasza? Where were you all these years? There are the other cinematic that sort of hint at Medivh being relevant again. There is the mention of Iridikron, the potential Galakrond 2.0, and a few other things. So let's break down the most recent Dragonflight cinematics and explore the hints that were given to us. Just real quick before we get into the video, as you guys know, I've been using the Ridge wallet for, well, over 2 years at this point, and it is literally the only wallet that I've used since. Now, additionally, Ridge started creating key cases as well, and they sent me this awesome looking one. Now, best of all, if you use my link in the description below, you can save up to 40% off until December 22nd. So make sure to use my code DORON and check out my link in the description below. So essentially, we got a few cinematics. We got the in-game ones that do actually give us some hints and spoilers, and some pretty obvious hints, and there is the official launch cinematic that is more of a cinematic like CGI type thing. Now, realistically, the cinematic just looks amazing, but it's really nothing out of the ordinary. Like, Blizzard has always been excellent with cinematics, so you're kinda just used to it. Like, you would essentially expect exactly something like this. On first glance, the launch cinematic was, well, cool looking, pretty run of the mill. You have some random characters that present as players, you have them showing off the drag tier in like a WoW classic cinematic manner, you have Razagad that show us some early villains and a few other bits and pieces. Now, there is one big hint, or I'd say 2 hints that are actually relevant. So the initial kinda non-serious one is that we actually got a tuskarr for the first time ever in a like actual CGI, or really any cinematic for that fact. They had been speculated to become playable pretty much since Wrath of the Lich King, and as they went out of their way, this could be a tiny hint, although personally I think this is more like a fan service, as Blizzard knows how much people really like the tuskarr, and it might also be a good way to bring back old players, as all the Red players know the tuskarr, so I'm guessing seeing them in a promotional cinematic might be like just an infusion of nostalgia for people to at least try out Dragonflight. And like, keep in mind, Wrath of the Lich King was when WoW was really at its peak player count, so personally I think this is the only reason they really added that. I doubt it is going to be a hint for like a playable tuskarr in the near future. However, the second hint is something that a lot of people noticed, and that I personally think is a lot more important than what it actually seems on first glance. Like, we literally got Alexstrasza in full glory, and she flew over some type of a desolate land. We still don't know what land that is, and she literally planted a gigantic, super lush forest in a matter of like seconds, which got a lot of people wondering if you can do that. Like, what were you doing, Alexstrasza, all these past like thousands of years on Azeroth? Like, if you really had this ability, wouldn't you be able to fix like half the Cataclysm and the Sundering and all these deserted lands that we have all over Azeroth? Now, to me, this seems like a really huge hint for what will be happening in the near future. So, when you examine all the info, this isn't really all that new. Alexstrasza is the dragon aspect of life. Like, this is literally her job description. We can actually see this exact ability all the way back in the Vradgate cinematic, when she destroyed the effects of the plague that was unleashed by the Forsaken, and she essentially turned Bolvar into some type of an immortal. Now, I'd say Blizzard is kind of winging it here. Like, we still don't know what the exact full extent of her ability is, as on one hand she's literally turning Bolvar into a scorched, crispy Death Knight, and on the other she's planting trees, which you gotta admit are kind of the opposites of each other. However, what is really important to notice is what actually happened at Vradgate. Like, when you further analyze it, when Alexstrasza and her red dragons scorched the battlefield, if you look closer, a bunch of trees were actually grown in that exact place. It was definitely like a few odd ones, more like an odd spell effect as opposed to planting a new ashen rail, but the fact is the trees were there. Now, as a bunch of people have pointed out, this is definitely the exact opposite of a really potent ground. It was essentially Northrend, that is barren and super cold as is. Like, naturally is literally the doorstep to the citadel of the Lich King, completely blighted land that was home to the undead, that was subsequently blighted yet again with a new Forsaken setup plague that is even more potent than the original one. I mean, Alexstrasza is powerful, but I doubt forest is going to be growing there no matter like how you plant it in whatever manner. So even the fact that a few trees grew is I'd say a pretty big deal. Now, the thing is, a lot of time has passed and things are really a lot different right now. First is that there are huge hints of Azeroth awakening in Dragonflight, and a lot of this potent elemental magic happening right now on the Dragon Isles. New book hints gave us some info that Azeroth may actually be elemental in magic to its core, and the reason it is actually arcane is because Titans pumped it up with energy. So seeing that the dragons settled here at their source and that they're elemental in nature as well, they might be able to greatly increase their power as Azeroth is awakening. Additionally, the other cinematics revealed to us that they're working to become aspects again, meaning that completely realistically Alexstrasza could become a lot more powerful than what we are used to. Now, at the same time, Blizzard gave us a hint in a recent official interview that there is hope for Night Elf and Gillian restoration. The Night Elves were given a seed from Underworld that they're relevant to Dragonflight. Ysera is coming back to Malfurion, going to the Shadowlands, and there are just a bunch of hints all over the place that some restoration is underway. So when you combine that with this insanely powerful bread that Alexstrasza just did in the recent cinematics, I don't think it is a coincidence that we could expect some crazy renewal stuff happening with this newly introduced power. We might see an entire zone restored by Alexstrasza by the end of this expansion. Now, there are two more hints to this from the other cinematic, the in-game ones that we have gotten. One is in regards to potentially a really big boss to the expansion called the Iridikron, and the second is the possible return of Medivh. So, during the Dragon aspect conversation, Iridikron's hunger is mentioned, and immediately Alexstrasza just changes the topic, which indicates that she is not only afraid of him, but also knows something that we don't, and that the dragons are kinda hiding some sort of information. Long story short, but apparently all the important dragons were originally clutchmates. Then the ones that you all know were elevated into the aspects by the Titan Keepers, while the so-called primal incarnates became a thing for the rebels, or let's really say the traditionalists would be a more appropriate description. Originally, proto-dragons were just all about elemental powers, and these guys didn't like what the Titans are doing. So, as far as we know, there are 4 primal incarnates, the one that you know of, that you have seen in the cinematic, the youngest, Razaget, and the second that we just learned about, the so-called Iridikron, the incarnate of Earth. As far as we know, this guy is the most powerful out of all of them, and the oldest, but what is an incredibly interesting plot point is that this guy is essentially the parallel to Deathwing, who was the aspect of Earth. So, there is a lot of room for some sort of Deathwing involvement in this storyline. They could be related, they could literally be brothers, as Alexstrasza hinted they were all pretty close, sort of like family. Plus, there are big hints that primalists are somehow related to the Old Gods, and we had seen Deathwing using Old God powers in that Dragonflight Legacies, so maybe Deathwing and Iridikron had a few more things in common that we don't really know about. Furthermore, Iridikron apparently had a hunger, which is the exact same thing Galakrond had, and now we know Galakrond had been corrupted by Yogg-Saron directly, as was revealed. This, again, is a really big hint for learning a lot more about Galakrond or getting further involvement from him. Now, on the other side, we have yet another hint. There is that cinematic where Khadgar shows up after all this time, so it's not news whatsoever that he's going to be relevant yet again. However, there might also be some subtle hints about the possible return of Medivh. After the conversation is over, as Khadgar talks about facing the storms ahead, there is this like a few second shot of 80-ish, which, as you may know, is some of the most iconic weapons of Warcraft, in particular, the most notable weapon of Medivh, Khadgar's former mentor. Now, of course, this would literally just be like a mindless speculation, but seeing that Khadgar is actually in Karazhan, that was the home to Medivh, and that there is actually a line involving Medivh in the pre-patch, there could be more stuff to it. When Khadgar meets the Draktyr, he says he would like to invite him to Karazhan to get Medivh's thoughts on their existence, and this is sort of like a random conversation line you wouldn't really even think about. Now, the thing about Medivh is that he's in a really weird place. He's sort of dead, but he's also, like, isn't. I'd say conventionally he isn't there, but his spirit kinda lingers around Karazhan. Seeing how powerful he was and all the things he knew, but most importantly the fact that he was a Guardian, this could mean his involvement could actually be real. As you may know, the Guardians use Arcane and the Ley Lines, and now that we're learning more about the nature of Azeroth and how this magic, both Titan and Elemental, really works, there is a lot of room for new stuff. So, while kind of not at all that revealing on first glance, there are definitely some really interesting potential storylines that we can extrapolate from these cinematics. Thank you for watching. Check out who is Iridikron by clicking on the screen, and check out our Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time.